Off.
I just got to do the
And if you
that's
can share.
allow, and I just do a acknowledgement of country before we kick into the proceedings there. So we pay our respect to all First Nations elders, both past and present, from lands where Charles Sturt University students reside. I particularly acknowledge the Wiradjuri people of Australia who are the traditional custodians of the land where I'm joining you from today. Um, with that, over to you, Cass. You're on mute.
Now
I've
I have
got your
cards.
screen. Yep.
All right. You can hear me?
Yep.
All right. So when we first put this together, sort of more thinking around um, the climatic situation at the moment, where it looks like we might be moving into more of a dry period. But yeah, it's probably more around just general risk right now in terms of what we can do with what. So just going to talk through a few different end things. It's not going to be a big, beautiful presentation. It's more around just throwing up some thoughts, and then yeah, afterwards we can have a bit more of a chat about things that are of interest. So the key things just want to make sure we're all on the same page, because we'll be mentioning inhibitors and stuff tonight, is really around the processes that happen when we have nitrogen system, which you're all fully aware of. So thinking about when we've got urea moving in, first thing that happens when that hits the soil and moisture is that it turns into the ammonium form as the microbes break that carbon, oxygen, nitrogen compound down into ammonium, at which point it can be lost through volatilization if it's on the dry surface. And then with moisture, then the microbes, another set of microbes kick in and convert that to nitrate, which is when we can have our loss through denitrification or through leaching in certain systems. In terms of the legume part of the rotation, and knowing that a lot of you guys have legumes as part of your system, when the legumes fix nitrogen from the atmosphere through the rhizobium, and then we have a high nitrogen plant. So in our legumes have a lower C/N ratio, a lot more nitrogen per unit carbon in them. When those plants break down, decompose into organic matter, it's enriched with this high nitrogen material. So we build up that soil organic N pool, which is within the organic matter fraction, which can then also be moved through to ammonium and then through to nitrate and stuff for plant use. In terms of our crop and uptake, most of the nitrogen that the crop takes up is through nitrate, but we know that there is some take up of ammonium there as well. So really just to make sure that we're all on the same page. So the first thing I wanted to flag tonight, knowing the role of legumes in most systems, is around the nitrogen coming from legumes. And in a year of dry conditions by risky or potentially dry conditions, who knows? We could get another dump of rain next week and we end up being completely saturated. But if we do have organic nitrogen in the system built up through legumes, but just wanted to talk through the value of that nitrogen piece. Now, we always talk about how great legumes are for N fixation and nitrogen into the system, but just to kind of spend a minute on that. Now, last week, before, sorry, at the GRDC update at Dubbo, Mark Peoples from CSIRO did a really nice overview of nitrogen from legumes and the value from that in our systems. And that this work's been going on for a lot of years. But I just thought the kind of rule of thumbs and the basic stuff that Mark came out with was kind of a good summary of the nitrogen value of those systems. Something that we're also thinking about a bit more if we have limited additional land coming into the system, or we're not sure about how much we're going to be able to access. So First of all, in terms of our biological nitrogen fixation, our BNF, we know that faba beans and lupins have the greatest capacity to move nitrogen from the atmosphere, and less in chickpeas. So first of all, we're going, well, if we have lupins or fabas in the system, we're going to have a lot greater capacity to pull that nitrogen in. But on a general rule, based on all the data that Mark's distilled, and it was presented very much as a review of where we're at for research in this area, he came up with an approximate rule of thumb of 90 kilograms of N fixed for every ton of pulse grain harvested. So if you've got pulses in the system and you're looking at this year going, following up with a cereal or canola, kind of how much can we hope to get from that? We know that, if we work on about that 90 kilos as an approximate to kind of help start that thinking going on. In more detail then, so if that's the amount of nitrogen fixed, what that means in terms of nitrogen supply for the following crop, really came out with a few averages, and these are averages across a lot of different trials. But sort of some key messages were post legumes in year 1. So the first year after growing a legume, if that's a pulse or a legume-based pasture, averaged mineral nitrogen for pre-sowing for that next crop was about an additional 49 kilos of N per hectare. If you're following a green or brown manure crop, that can be up to about 83 kilos of N per hectare. And that's additional N compared to if there's no legume in that system. So in terms of starting point into this coming season, what might you expect in terms of that additional mineral N? Now, just going back a sec, when we talk about mineral N, mineral nitrogen is the combination or the sum of the amount of ammonium and nitrate in the soil at that point in time. Knowing that it doesn't reflect the whole nitrogen in the system, we know that our organic N pool is massive, and then our mineral N, which is the ammonium and nitrate that's moving through for plant growth at that point in time, is only a small component of that, which is why we have to measure mineral N at certain time points to be able to associate it with what's available. So it's that ammonium plus nitrate is our mineral nitrogen. So when we look at these numbers, if we're talking at pre-sow mineral N of an additional 49 kilos, that's the ammonium and nitrate in the system within the soil profile, generally about at 0 to 60 centimetres in our southern systems, down to 1.2 in the northern systems. So that's an additional nitrogen that can be available for plant use. What was interesting was the second year, so the second year post legumes, if you're following a pulse, so a grain legume, you've then got approximately an additional 20 kilos of N in the system. And if you're coming from a legume pasture, a green or brown manure, this can be up to 36 additional kilos of mineral N. So really showing that post legumes, there's a big hit the first year, and then there's an ongoing hit in year 2, which is showing that continual breakdown processes of that organic nitrogen. Now, there's also commentary that a legume pasture, particularly lucerne, will continue to have some benefit into year 3 as well. The other thing to think about is when we're talking legumes and nitrogen supply, that legume-derived N, so mineral N coming from a legume, is at least twice as efficient on a unit basis compared to what we apply with urea N. The reason for that is that nitrogen moving from organic matter into mineral N for plant uptake isn't exposed to a lot of the loss pathways that our fertilizers are. So they're inherently a lot more efficient. And we know that microbes will only convert organic nitrogen to mineral N as they need it as well. So it's not a massive flush hitting the system at once. So I just thought those numbers and rules of thumbs were quite interesting, quite relevant if you're looking at what your N budgets might look like into this year, and knowing particularly into the Central West area, the role of legumes is quite important. Other things to consider this year, and things to consider generally in terms of how we can get best bang for buck for our urea.
Can I
Thinking
interrupt
about,
there, Kath?
yeah, Terry.
Just going back to that, the variation, the difference between your legume derived N versus your urea based. I've been selling a bit of vetch seed and talking to different farmers, and one made a comment about a crop on a following vetch burnt off, but that sort of doesn't align with what you just said about the um, legume derived N only being available when needed. Would have there been something else happening there, or
Does seem odd. That's not something that we really see often. So what we know is that we can have a massive amount of organic N in the system, but the microbes will only convert so much of that. So if all our nitrogen's coming from an organic source, such as lucerne or vetch or other legume pastures or species, they won't keep mineralizing a heap of N just because they can. So we can have systems where the total nitrogens can be this much in one system and kind of 10 times that in another system, and they can both have the same amount of mineral N coming through. It's rate limited. So the idea that there was such a massive flush of mineral N that it then caused damage to the following crop is that's something that I've never seen, Terry.
yeah, no, that's good. That's what I thought, but that just confirms it. Thanks.
Years ago, we actually did some cool work on this where we looked at soils from around Horsham, so in the Wimmera, but had been continuous cropping trial for, I don't know, 30 plus years and had really become quite degraded. Soil carbon levels are really low in that system. I think they're about 1% or less. And we also measured soils from down at Hamilton. So high rainfall, long-term perennial pasture with a high clover base, really, really high organic nitrogen levels, total carbon of, I think, 4.5. The Hamilton soil had, I think, 10 times the total nitrogen as the Horsham soil did, but the mineral N numbers were pretty much the same. We then tested that through a heap of other soils and came up with the same kind of scenario that microbially derived mineral N will only create so much in the bucket at one time. Because at the end of the day, the microbes don't know the plants need it. They don't know that we need it. They just do what they do up to certain thresholds. So, yeah, I found that really, really interesting. All right, so just to, if you're thinking about your nitrogen supply and you're not sure about how much urea you can access, and you've got legumes there, just thinking about kind of what value they bring. A few other just things to think about, and I know this is all stuff that you're all talking about more generally, and there's a lot of really good information around, is if you can only access limited urea, let's say you can't get everything that you want for this year, we want to make sure that what you're applying is going to be used as most efficiently as possible. So things like, there's been some really good work in southern New South Wales, up around kind of between Randon and West Wyalong, around pre-drilling urea, or if you've got a second boot on your seeder to place deep, but actually getting it below that high biology zone. So if you can, if it works and systems allow, and you've got the diesel to do it, placement of urea below that organic matter layer will actually reduce a lot of that risk of loss. If it's below the microbially active zone, so below that layer of organic that we have, that will slow down the loss because it will actually slow down the microbial transformation. the other thing that happens is as urea converts to ammonium in a clay-based soil in that environment, the ammonium will actually then be absorbed by that clay, similar to how anhydrous works in the cotton systems. So we end up with a kind of a slow release profile. It's not something that's done commonly. Those who do it have shown it to be really effective. But if that was, just wanted to flag that as an idea to consider. If you can't place it in the soil, then again, if you're limited in terms of the urea that you've got available, reducing the amount that you're applying at sowing, if you are applying it at sowing, particularly if we're looking at a dry sow system this year, or kind of hold off your urea spreading until early tiller. The reason for that is that as temperatures decrease, the rate of volatilization decreases, and the rate of denitrification also decreases. So you've kind of got the more you can hold off a little bit, the less lost pathways you've got going on. The other thing to think about is looking at deep end sampling. There's a lot of farmers who are talking about doing more deep ends this year than they have before, because they want to make sure that they're getting most bang for buck with the urea that they apply, and they're putting it in the right place. So looking at doing some deep end sampling to know what you've got in the bank already, which can then help inform your urea decisions to know kind of which paddocks are going to have the best impact for what you're applying. So if you've got high mineral end loads already, then are you getting towards the top end of your diminishing returns curve with your nitrogen response, or is every kilo then that you apply going to have maximum benefit because you've got less in the system to start with? With any of your deep end work, incremental sampling is incredibly valuable. Splitting those cores into segments to ensure that you get the best accuracy of where your N is and how much you've got. A few years ago in Cool Soil, we did a series of samplings to increment deep N versus 0 to 60, and showed the real value of getting more accuracy around where that N is in the profile. If most of that nitrogen's right up on the surface because we haven't had much rain to move it, but you're doing a 0 to 60, you're actually going to dilute that nitrogen value out, which reduces its accuracy, as opposed to knowing that you've got most of it up on the surface and not much at depth. The other thing which you've heard me talk about a lot before is, I know we're talking about nitrogen, but having adequate phosphorus and sulfur in the system is critical in times when we're limited in the N that we can use. So we need that seed to be able to see phosphorus at germination to make sure that it can access the P that it needs, to ensure we get that good early vigor and plant growth. And then we need adequate sulfur levels, because if our sulfur is limiting, then our nitrogen isn't used properly. So sulfur is a key requirement for nitrogen metabolism. So if we're missing the backbone, to make it work, then that nitrogen's not going to be used. So any times when we are limited in nitrogen usage or availability, these things become so much more important. For example, if we don't have good phosphorus and sulfur, we may not be getting the robust root structures that we're looking for, which we want in order to exploit nitrogen and water in a profile. For those on sands, keep an eye on your K levels as well. Some more information coming through is around our K is, well, we've known that soil testing for K has been really fluffy. The numbers that we get, we have very low accuracy on those numbers. But there's even more information coming through now that even if we do have K in the system, particularly in our sands, that may not be moving through to the plant at the rate required. So just to keep an eye on those K levels as well, particularly in your sands. The last thing just in terms of general strategy is ideally we'd be managing our acidity and knowing that soil acidity is the largest throttle in term behind water for plant growth. We'd want to make sure that our roots are functional and healthy and the plant's not stressed. So again, it can take up that nitrogen, and our pH levels are adequate for that organic matter cycling, which enables those microbial communities that convert organic N into mineral N to work. So if our pHs are throttled or handbraked, that means that everything else that we want to happen isn't going to happen. So in an ideal world, that acidity is managed and is sorted. But at least if you're still in the process of working through soil acidity issues, at least to recognise if you've got issues or not. Particularly in a year like this year, where we're likely to move into a drying season. So our roots have to work really well. And we want that nitrogen to be used really well. If we've got paddocks that we've identified are really low in pH and highly acid with high levels of aluminium, then they may not be the paddocks that we take a risk on in terms of high inputs for this year. Example is I was talking to a farmer this morning who has aluminium levels up to 49% in the top 20 centimetres. Yes, Greg, it can happen. And was considering growing canola in that paddock this year. Talk through that due to the fact that I'm likely to get some good rain to consolidate his lime incorporation and stuff prior to sowing, and knowing canola is a high risk post-lime cultivation anyway, decided that that wasn't the paddock to invest money into canola this year, just due to all the risks around being able to set that crop up well and then continue to supply. So yeah, just some thoughts in terms of how thinking, some of the things to think through around de-risking your nitrogen usage this year. Just probably don't need to go through this, but I was thinking around the how much of the ammonium gets converted into ammonia and lost through volatilization, and knowing that temperature is a really big player with that. So when we're broadcasting urea, if we're having higher temperatures, then we are going to get a greater loss profile of that. And this is just saying that if you're in pHs in less than 7, for example, your risk of loss due to pH and temperature is very low. But as you get more into the alkalis and you hit greater temperatures, then your loss pathway is going to accelerate. So just finally, just wanted to flag the inhibitor story, just as a chance to explain kind of where they fit or where they may not fit. And there's 2 different types of inhibitors that we talk about. One of them is the urease inhibitor, and one of them is the nitrification inhibitor. The urease is actually slows down that conversion from the urea granule to ammonia. So if we go right back to the start and we look at this diagram again, the urease inhibitors slow down that conversion from that, or that breakdown of the urea molecule into ammonium. So it's basically putting a slow release handbrake on that process. By doing that, it then slows that rate risk of volatilization. In comparison, the nitrification inhibitor slows down the conversion from ammonium to nitrate. Now that ammonium is well bound onto clays, it doesn't move with water the same way that nitrate does, so it's more stable. Once that moves through to nitrate, that's when we're at risk of denitrification loss, if we're in waterlogged, warm wet conditions, for example, or we're at risk of leaching under high water events. In terms of the use case, the nitrification inhibitor is more suited to kind of like Southwest Victoria, where they spend more time being waterlogged than they do actually aerobic, or up in the cotton, where you're talking about highly saturated conditions, quite often. Whereas the urease inhibitor is more of just a slow release package on that urea. So if we go back to these then, we've got some of the funky chemistry stuff there that you can go through at your leisure, but just kind of flagging where those points are, where those inhibitors kick in. So just finishing off with a nitrification inhibitor, and just to say, I don't believe that this product has a fit in a lot of your systems, apart from the fact that it's very expensive. It does, first of all, need to be incorporated into soil at sowing. And it's very much around that denitrification loss pathway. Now, if you were looking at it purely from an emission perspective, if you apply this product, because it reduces nitrous oxide loss under the right conditions, you will get a tick for an emission reduction because of that. But it's really into those high input, high water conditions. In terms of some of the products that are sold under this, Empower and Trench and Entech are some of those. And I won't look at the results for that one because it's not really relevant. The urease may be, it's the kind of thing that has a bit more of a fit in systems because it introduces more of a de-risking and efficiency kind of play. Because what this product reduces the loss of ammonia, which technically isn't a greenhouse gas, it doesn't result in any emission reduction factors for the accounting, but because it can slow down that urea usage or conversion, it can lead to efficiency gains if you're getting a lot of gassing off. We've got some trials through Cool Soil with these products at the moment in the MIA and in the Murray. And the feedback we're getting from the farmers that are using them are that they do kind of make sense. We're also seeing some of the big corporate farms using these for pre-sowing of sowing of urea before spreading. Spreading of urea before sowing, in order to spread out their logistics in terms of nitrogen management, knowing that it's the urea is basically in a slow release pathway. These products aren't expensive. I think they're about $35 to $40 extra per ton of urea. But and this is interesting at urea pricing is going through the roof, which on the one hand you kind of go, well, I don't want to spend any more money. On the other hand, what we saw last time urea pricing went through the roof is a lot more farmers interested in this urease product because it was kind of, if I'm spending all this money, I want to make sure I'm not going to lose it. So there's two schools of thought there. Some of the brand names in this are Green Urea by Incitec or Glaze, some of the others. So that's really just all I wanted to talk through. So just some results from some urease work, showing that this is some old data from Horsham, just showing that it is very seasonally dependent on if it's going to work or not. But yeah, just wanted to leave it there, and I'll stop sharing. And just
we did have one question in the comment just around the urease inhibitors. You mentioned some of the brand names that were in the market, but the question was where do the urease inhibitors come from? So I suppose that's in reference to where do you access or...
Yeah, so it's a chemical compound. So it's created through industrial manufacturing that actually just slows down the enzyme, the microbial enzyme that does that conversion from urea to ammonium. In terms of how you can access that, at the moment, most of these products are coded at port or at wholesale. But if it's something that you're looking to do, that a lot of the distributors into the regions are able to code as well. So if it's something that you haven't really had much to do with before, it might be worth a question if you are looking at a significant urea spend. But yeah, just wanted to flag it out there. But Greg, shall we stop recording?
Yeah, might finish the recording there. Thank you all, and I'll stop the recording now.